again for the previous messiness on this Blackboard page. I was trying to make the class fulfill too many different requirements, and now I've addressed that problem for the most part. So it's still possible that in the second half, in the next couple of weeks, you can you can have some choices for what you would like to read and what you'd like to work on. I'll make a new discussion where you can put requests and suggestions. But for now, what we see on the Blackboard page and the sequential order of the modules works for both the 398 African American Young Adult Literature and for the African American Lit 291 or 391. So our initial modules started with Phyllis Wheatley in the late 1700s and some women like Wheatley who wrote in the 1700s and late 1800s. Then Paul Laurence Dunbar, and then jumped ahead to Maya Angelou. Even though I don't go in completely straight alphabetical order, I think there's also an intertextual order, which means clearly we want to think about Maya Angelou's use of Dunbar's phrases. So in the many ways that you can organize literature, you can have historical chronology, or you can have the relationship between texts, or you can organize literature in terms of its cultural belonging, shall we say. None of those are really set in stone for me. Our first exam, you have about a week to do. I'm not caught up in due dates or in word counts for papers. I know they're useful to you, but please don't let them make you scared or nervous or uncertain. They're not a big deal to me. I've created some modules for this week that will help tie together a lot of ideas that we've already began studying in last week's modules. So this first Harlem Renaissance Revisited includes a collection of poems and a quick review of literary periods. For June 14th, there are 3 short stories. Actually, I apologize, 4 short stories. 2 radically different readings from W.B. Du Bois that are also much less difficult than the Du Bois essay, as well as some stylistically very different prose narratives from Sutton Griggs and Langston Hughes. And I'll explain more about that tomorrow. So to look at the authors in this 613 module, this PBS documentary is really great. It is in Films on Demand, I believe, or Alexander Street. Long story short, one of the library databases, which they changed the links to daily, so this link might not work for you in finding it. What you need to do is to go to the library databases and just search Making a Way Out of No Way. Also, there are, around minutes 7 and 8, there are lynching images in the documentary, and I always like to warn people when those show up because they can be very traumatic. There's a quiz on the documentary which ties together some of our historical context about the Harlem Renaissance with some of the authors and key figures in the Harlem Renaissance. And this quick refresher document, which if you are going to teach literature, is important on standards and state guidelines. The names of the literary periods here on the right in American literature, and on the left, the familiar terms and periods in England. So I try to set those up for you to give you an idea of who fits where and how they measure up. I always like to say scholars invented these periods so that they'd have something to argue about forever. And believe me, people argue about it, and they're all very flawed. However, it's nice just to be able to set up an initial way to organize the order in which different authors appear. So we have our colonial authors, and I can't think of any African Americans, the Revolutionary American authors, the early national authors, transcendentalism, applies more so to Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Henry David Thoreau and Margaret Fuller. There's also Black Transcendentalism, but we aren't going to have time to go into that this semester. And it also comes along with the abolitionist literature, the era of reform literature. We could call some of Dunbar's dialect poetry social realism because it depicts people as they are in their cultural homes. And then we have the Harlem Renaissance or New Negro period, which will not always look modern or new or different, might combine elements of Victorian poetry with a modernist breaking apart of binaries or oppositions or things that are usually considered separate, and social realist or political or demanding rights and full citizenship kind of conventions. This little handout will help you put in order what we've looked at so far, and you can refer back to it when you write the first paper next week. So I'm going to stop this because it's a little bit too long already, and I'll make another video in which I quickly explain something about the authors I've chosen for this unit.